Part 1, when fear shuts the door of the heart. There are moments in life when fear becomes so thick, so heavy, so real, that it feels like a door quietly closing inside the soul. It doesn't slam, it doesn't warn, it simply shuts. And the person standing behind that door is you alone, trembling and unsure of how to breathe again. That is where our story begins. Not with victory, not with certainty, but with a heart carrying too much. The world around you continues to move, cars pass, people rush, clocks tick, yet inside, everything feels suspended in a cold, unmoving silence. Something in your life has cracked. Maybe it was a loss you didn't see coming, a relationship that ended with more questions than answers, a diagnosis that whispered a threat into your ear, or a financial weight that settled on your shoulders without mercy. Whatever it was, it stole the ground beneath your feet and replaced it with trembling. And in that trembling, a single question rises like a quiet echo. Lord, are you even hearing me? You pray, but the words feel thin. You whisper, but your voice feels small. You look for comfort, but fear spreads like shadows under the doorframe of the heart. You tell yourself to be strong, to hold on, to keep going, but even strength feels like something distant, something other people have. You try to pretend you're fine, smile through the pain, act as if everything is under control, but deep within, you know the truth. You are afraid of losing what little stability you have left, afraid of repeating mistakes you thought you had healed from, afraid that maybe this time you won't make it through, afraid that God is watching from far away instead of walking beside you. And this fear, slow, quiet, suffocating, begins to convince you that you must survive by yourself, that no one will understand, that no help will come, that the silence you hear is divine distance instead of divine patience. Yet even in this darkness, something tender stirs, a longing not for the storm to disappear, but for a peace strong enough to hold you through it. A peace that is not created by perfect circumstances, but by a God who meets broken people in broken places. A peace that doesn't require you to be fearless, only honest. In this beginning, the heart does not yet know the miracle that is coming. It only knows it's trembling. But trembling is not failure. Trembling is the doorway through which true faith enters. And even though you cannot feel it yet, a whisper is forming in the unseen, a whisper that will one day become a prayer, and that prayer will become a lifeline. Lord, give me peace that rises above my fear. That is where the journey begins, not in strength, but in surrender, not in clarity, but in trust, not in victory, but in a heart finally ready to let God in. That the din so, and instead you begin to ask, who is this shaping me to become? Because in the end, the greatest lesson their disappearance teaches you is this: you are stronger than the pain they brought, and you are becoming a version of yourself they could never touch, a soul who knows how to stand in their own light without needing anyone to reflect it. Part 2, the greatest fear, believing you must carry everything alone. Fear is a strange teacher. It does not arrive with clarity, and it rarely announces its lessons. Instead, it sneaks into the spaces between your thoughts, slowly convincing you that the weight you carry is yours alone. You wake up every morning with the same invisible burden on your chest: responsibility, expectations, painful memories, the pressure to be strong even when you are quietly breaking. And somewhere along the path of surviving, day after day, a lie begins to form. If I don't hold everything together, everything will fall apart. This is the greatest fear, not the storm itself, but the belief that you must weather it alone. You start to fear your own emotions, because you know that if you let one tear fall, countless others might follow. You fear asking for help because you don't want to be a burden. You fear opening your heart because the last time you opened it, it was hurt in a way you still don't fully understand. So you armor yourself with silence, pretending to be stronger than you feel, pretending to be whole while something inside you quietly fractures. And in that private battlefield of the soul, fear whispers, "Don't let anyone see you like this, not even God." You begin to pray differently, not with trust, but with desperation. Your prayers sound more like frantic messages thrown into an empty sky. Lord, what am I supposed to do? Lord, why is this happening? Lord, are you still with me? You want to believe he is listening, but the pressure inside your chest grows heavier each time life gives you another unanswered question. You look around and see people who seem stable, calm, unshaken, and you wonder why you can't be like them. You wonder why your heart trembles so easily, why your peace evaporates the moment life shifts. Suddenly, every flaw feels magnified, every insecurity sounds louder, and every weakness threatens to expose you. This is what fear does. It isolates you not only from others, but from the truth. It convinces you that vulnerability is danger, when in reality, vulnerability is the place where God meets you most deeply. And yet, you keep trying to manage everything with your own hands. The bills, the expectations, the relationships, the wounds, the future. You tighten your grip as if control is the key to stability, but the tighter you hold, the more your soul aches. Little by little, your prayers turn from hopeful whispers into silent screams inside your heart. And eventually you break, not in a dramatic, visible way, but in a quiet shattering that only God can hear. You sit alone in a room that suddenly feels too big, too cold, too empty. And for the first time, you realize the crushing truth. You are exhausted. Not from living, but from carrying what was never meant to be carried alone. It is in this moment of quiet collapse that something sacred begins. Because when your strength ends, his strength can finally begin. When your efforts fail, his grace has room to enter. When your heart is too tired to pretend, honesty slips out in a trembling prayer that is more real than anything you've said before. Lord, I don't know how to do this without you. It is a confession filled with fear, yet wrapped in longing. You are not asking for a miracle. You are asking for a hand to hold in the darkness. You are not asking for a perfect life. You are asking for the courage to breathe again. And while nothing seems to change externally, bills remain, memories remain, wounds remain, something shifts subtly inside. You begin to sense that God has never expected you to carry life by yourself. The independence you once believed was strength now reveals itself as isolation. The control you fought to maintain now shows itself as chains. And slowly, gently, the truth begins to settle into your heart like the first warm light of dawn. You were never meant to do life alone. The fear was not in the circumstances. The fear was in the lie that you had to survive them without God. As this realization forms within you, a quiet longing rises, not for escape, but for presence. Not for everything to be solved, but for your heart to be held. For the first time, you allow the possibility that peace is not earned by strength, but given by grace. And in that possibility, the door of your heart moves not fully open yet, but unlocking. This is where transformation begins. Not when fear disappears, but when you finally stop believing it has to be faced alone. Part 3, when God is silent. There comes a point in every believer's journey when God's silence feels louder than any storm. You pray, yet there is no immediate reply. You cry out, but the heavens feel still. You search for signs, for whispers, for comfort, but the silence stretches long enough to make you question everything you thought you knew about faith. And in that silence, a piercing loneliness begins to bloom. It is not the loneliness of being abandoned by people, it is the ache of believing, even for a moment, that God Himself may have stepped back. You ask yourself whether your prayers were too small, too broken, too repetitive to matter. You wonder if you disappointed Him, if your mistakes pushed Him away, if your doubts somehow disqualified you from His attention. But the truth hidden beneath the quiet is far more mysterious and far more loving than your fears suggest. God's silence is not His absence. His silence is not punishment. His silence is not rejection. His silence is a sacred space where something deep within you is being reshaped. But in the moment, you don't see that. In the moment, silence feels like a closed door. You kneel beside your bed, whispering prayers into the darkness, and the lack of response feels like a weight pressing against your chest. The world keeps demanding your strength, but inside, you feel weaker every day. You watch other people receive answers, breakthroughs, miracles, and you wonder why heaven seems so quiet when it comes to your own cries. The silence begins to twist your thoughts. It tells you that God may not care as much as you hoped. It tells you your pain is insignificant compared to the problems of the world. It tells you you're unseen, unheard, forgotten. But then something happens, not externally, but internally. Amid the quiet, you begin to hear yourself, your true fears, your true longings, your true wounds. The silence forces you to sit with truths you have avoided for years, truths you buried under busyness, noise, and distraction. And strangely, this painful stillness becomes a mirror. You begin to see the parts of you that need healing, the habits that need breaking, the beliefs that need surrender, the wounds that need God's touch. Silence becomes the place where God prepares you for the answer, not the place where He withholds it. Think of a seed buried beneath the soil. To anyone watching, nothing is happening. But beneath the surface, the seed is splitting open, transforming, preparing for growth that cannot be rushed. The soil is silent, yet the miracle is happening in secret. That is what God's silence is like. It is not a denial, it is a gestation, a hidden work, a quiet rebuilding of the soul. In the stillness, God is fortifying you for what is coming. But you, standing in the middle of your unanswered prayers, only feel the weight of waiting. You ask again, Lord, where are you? And though the heavens still feel quiet, something gentle, almost imperceptible, begins to move inside your chest. A small, steady reminder, I am here, not shouted, not dramatic, simply present. You recall moments from your past when you thought you wouldn't survive, but somehow you made it through. You recall nights you cried until your body trembled, yet morning came, and strength came with it. None of that was accidental. None of that happened without Him. Slowly, you begin to realize that God's silence is not emptiness, it is alignment. It is Him pulling you closer, not pushing you away. It is Him rooting your faith, not in visible reassurance, but in trust. Because if God answered instantly every time, your faith would remain shallow. It would depend on signs, not surrender, on outcomes, not intimacy. Silence teaches dependence, and dependence teaches love, the kind of love that isn't shaken by what your eyes cannot see. And then something shifts, not in the world around you, but in your perception of Him. You start to understand that silence is not the end of the conversation, it is part of the conversation. It is the pause where God prepares your heart to receive what you could not have handled before. It is the quiet where He strengthens your spirit so that when the answer comes, you will not mistake the gift for the giver. In that realization, fear loosens its grip, doubt softens, and though the silence may continue for a little longer, you are no longer terrified by it, because now you know God is not silent because He is far. God is silent because He is near, so near that He is working inside you in ways words cannot yet reveal. Part 4, the collapse, where grace touches the broken heart. There is a moment in every soul's battle when the weight becomes too much to carry, when the silence has stretched too long, when the fear has twisted itself into every corner of your mind and you finally crumble. Not in anger, not in rebellion, but in exhaustion so deep it feels like a surrender you didn't choose. You sit or kneel or fall onto the floor, your body trembling because it can no longer pretend to be strong. Tears come not because you are weak, but because you are human. And in that collapse, for the first time, something honest breaks free from within you. You whisper words you've been avoiding. Lord, I can't do this anymore. These words don't sound like defeat. They sound like truth. They sound like the unmasking of a soul that has been trying, striving, controlling, holding everything too tightly for too long. They sound like the beginning of healing. There is a sacredness in this collapse that most people never recognize. The world teaches you to hold yourself together at all costs, to walk upright even when your heart is falling to pieces. But heaven sees differently. Heaven sees your breaking point as a doorway. Heaven sees your tears not as failures, but as prayers. Heaven sees your collapse not as the end, but as the moment your spirit becomes open enough for grace to enter. Because grace does not enter the proud. It does not pour into a heart convinced it can manage life on its own. Grace rushes toward the broken, the surrendered, the trembling. It fills the spaces that strength cannot reach. In this moment, your moment of collapse, you may not feel anything holy. You may feel only the ache. But something unseen is happening. The very thing you feared most falling apart is becoming the place where God meets you most intimately. You feel your breath shaking, your thoughts spiraling, your hope slipping, and yet beneath all of that, there is a stillness rising. Not peace yet, but a hush, a pause, a gentle awareness that you are no longer carrying this moment alone. You may not hear a voice, but you sense a presence. You may not see a miracle, but you feel a softening. The trembling in your heart begins to slow, not because the problem has vanished, but because something deeper is happening. You have stopped fighting God for control. You have let the truth spill out of you without fear. And in that honesty, grace finds you. It always does. In the Bible, breakthroughs rarely came when people were strong. They came when people reached the end of themselves. Jacob wrestled until he could no longer stand. Elijah collapsed beneath a tree and begged for death. Hannah wept so intensely she could no longer speak. David cried out from caves and deserts. And each time, God did not rebuke their weakness. He met them in it. Your collapse is not a punishment. It is an invitation. An invitation to stop pretending you have everything under control. An invitation to be held by a God who is gentle with the brokenhearted. An invitation to let grace rebuild what fear has shattered. As you sit there, breath slowing, tears drying, a whisper begins to form, not from your mind, but from your spirit. Lord, give me peace that rises above this fear. It is not a polished prayer. It is raw. It is vulnerable. It is trembling. But that trembling is faith. Not the loud kind, not the certain kind, the real kind, the kind that rises from the ashes of everything you thought you had to be strong enough to handle. Heaven leans close when a heart prays like this, because this prayer is not asking for escape, it is asking for transformation, not for the storm to disappear, but for the heart to learn how to stand inside it without breaking. In that whisper, something shifts. You feel a faint warmth, a small flicker of courage you didn't expect. It does not erase the darkness, but it pushes it back just enough for you to breathe. This is the touch of grace, not dramatic, not explosive, but unmistakably real. You realize, maybe for the first time, that God does not wait for your victories. He meets you in your ruin. That is where his love shines brightest, in the cracks you spent years trying to hide. And as you rise slowly from the place of collapse, a quiet truth settles into your spirit. You were never alone, not for one moment, even in the silence, even in the fear, even in the breaking. Grace had been waiting for the exact moment your walls finally fell. Because where you collapse, that is exactly where God begins to restore. Part 5, the transformation, when peace no longer depends on circumstances. Peace does not arrive with the sound of trumpets or the sudden disappearance of your problems. It comes quietly, almost shyly, after the storm inside you has exhausted itself. It comes in a way that feels so gentle, you barely recognize it at first. But something in you knows something is different now. The world around you has not changed. The bills are still on the table. The uncertainty still hangs in the air. The memories that hurt still exist. The future still feels like an unanswered question. And yet, your heart reacts differently. Where panic once rose like a wave, there is now a steady calm. Where fear once tightened around your chest, there is now room to breathe. Where doubt once whispered constantly, there is now a quiet knowing that you are not walking alone. This shift, this internal reorientation, is the beginning of true transformation. It is not the removal of the storm, but the discovery of the one who stands with you in it. You wake up one morning and notice that your first thought is no longer dread. You feel the weight of your worries, but they no longer crush you. Instead of spiraling into fear, you pause, breathe, and whisper, Lord, be with me today. And you mean it, not as a desperate plea, but as a partnership, a steady hand you trust. The circumstances may be the same, but something profound has changed in your inner landscape. This is what Scripture means when it describes the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding. This peace is not logical. It does not match the chaos around you. It does not depend on solutions, answers, or guarantees. It rises from a deeper place, a place God reshaped during the silence, during the collapse, during the surrender. You begin to understand that peace was never meant to be the reward at the end of your struggle. Peace was meant to be the strength that carries you through it. As days pass, you notice small transformations. Where you once rushed to control everything, you now choose trust. Where you once feared worst-case scenarios, you now focus on staying present. Where you once felt abandoned, you now sense a companionship that steadies your soul. You realize that God's presence was not something you had to earn. It was something you simply had to stop resisting. Slowly, the voices of fear lose their authority. They still speak, but they no longer define you. Anxiety still knocks on the door, but it no longer enters uninvited. Doubt still tries to rise, but it is met with truth instead of panic. This is inner maturity, the transformation God was shaping in you all along. You begin to see the purpose behind the silence, behind the waiting, behind the moments that once broke you. Not because God wanted you to suffer, but because He wanted to build a foundation inside you that circumstances could not shake. A foundation made not of certainty, but of trust, not of strength, but of surrender, not of self-reliance, but of holy dependence. And as this transformation deepens, something beautiful happens. You stop begging God to change everything around you and start asking Him to change everything within you. Your prayers shift from "Lord, fix this" to "Lord, guide me," from "take this away" to "teach me through it," from "make the path easier" to "make my faith stronger." This is the moment you realize that peace was never outside, it was always an inside job. A miracle happening quietly beneath the surface, just like the seed breaking open underground before it ever reaches the light. People around you may not understand the change. They see the same circumstances, but not the new resilience forming inside you. They see the same challenges, but not the new grace with which you face them. They see the same person, but not the renewed spirit that now anchors everything you do. And that is the beauty of this transformation. It is invisible to the world, but undeniable to the soul. You no longer crumble at the first sign of trouble. You no longer drown in the noise of your fears. You no longer believe that your peace depends on life being perfect. Instead, you carry a stillness that cannot be taken from you. A stillness born from the moment you surrendered everything to God and discovered that He was carrying you long before you realized you were falling. This peace, this new way of breathing, thinking, and living is not fragile. It is not temporary. It is not circumstantial. It is the evidence that God has rebuilt your heart from the inside out. And even if storms return, and they will, you now know something you didn't know before. The one who calmed the storm outside can calm the storm within. And once peace lives inside you, no circumstance has the power to steal it.
Part 6, Walking in Faith. When peace becomes the voice that leads you. There comes a quiet moment after transformation when you realize peace is no longer something you are chasing, it is something you are following. Not an emotion that flickers in and out, but a presence that whispers direction with a clarity your fear could never offer. This is where faith becomes movement. This is where trust becomes action. This is where the heart, once trembling, begins to walk with a steadiness that surprises even you. You wake up with the same responsibilities, the same uncertainties, the same world that once overwhelmed you, but instead of reacting with anxiety, you now respond with intention. Peace has altered your reflexes. Fear once urged you to run, hide, control, or panic. Peace urges you to breathe, listen, and wait. Fear once pushed you to fix everything immediately. Peace teaches you to take one obedient step at a time. You notice that your prayers sound different now. They are no longer frantic attempts to escape your circumstances. They are conversations rooted in partnership, trust, and surrender. Lord, guide me. Lord, strengthen me. Lord, show me the next step. And heaven answers not always with dramatic miracles, but with alignment. Doors that were once closed begin to open. Opportunities that once terrified you now feel possible. People who drained your spirit slowly fade from your life, making space for relationships that uplift rather than exhaust you. This shift is not accidental. It is the fruit of walking in faith. Because when peace leads, chaos loses its influence. When God guides, fear loses its throne. There will still be moments of uncertainty. There will still be days when old worries creep back into your mind. But now you have learned something that changes everything. You are not walking alone. You start making decisions with a clarity you never had before, not because the path is fully visible, but because your heart is no longer clouded by fear. Peace becomes your compass. You no longer choose based on panic. You choose based on alignment with God's voice. You no longer move out of desperation. You move out of discernment. You no longer act from survival. You act from purpose. And with every step, you begin to witness how God works through obedience. A small act of courage brings unexpected strength. A single step of faith brings unexpected provision. A quiet moment of surrender brings unexpected breakthroughs. You begin to see that faith is not about dramatic leaps. It is about consistent steps fueled by trust. Some days, faith looks heroic. Some days, faith looks ordinary, like sending a message you were afraid to send, forgiving someone who hurt you, applying for something you felt unqualified for, or resting when your old self would have drowned in anxiety. Each step is a declaration, Lord, I trust you more than my fear. And heaven responds to declarations like that. Slowly your life begins to transform externally in the same way your heart did internally. Not because your strength increased, but because your dependence on God did. The more you follow peace, the more clearly you recognize His hand. You start to notice small miracles woven into ordinary days, the right person arriving at the right moment, clarity forming where confusion once lived, resilience rising when exhaustion tried to return. You begin to understand that peace is not passive, it is powerful. Peace does not mean accepting defeat, it means walking forward with divine confidence. Peace is not the absence of storms, it is the presence of God within them. And so your life becomes a testimony not of perfection, but of perseverance, not of certainty, but of trust, not of your own wisdom, but of God's faithfulness. People around you begin to notice. They may not understand what changed, but they sense the shift. They see a calmness that does not match your circumstances. They see a strength that doesn't come from human effort. They see a quiet courage that can only come from someone who has been touched by grace. You realize in these moments that your journey was never just about you. Your obedience becomes light for others. Your peace becomes a refuge for someone else's storm. Your story becomes evidence that God still transforms, still guides, still walks with His people. And as you continue forward, one simple truth anchors everything. You don't need to know the whole path. You only need to follow the one who leads it. Faith becomes less about what you see and more about who you trust. Peace becomes less about the world around you and more about the world within you. And step by step, guided by that holy stillness, you walk into the life God had been preparing for you all along, one obedient moment at a time. Part 7, the conclusion. When peace becomes your way of living and your daily prayer, 500 words, there comes a moment in every spiritual journey when peace is no longer something you seek occasionally, but something you begin to live from. It becomes the atmosphere of your heart, the rhythm of your decisions, the quiet strength beneath everything you do. Not because life became easier, but because your soul learned where to rest. You stop measuring God's presence by how smooth your path is. You stop equating silence with abandonment. You stop believing that fear has the right to narrate your story. Instead, you wake each morning with a calm awareness that the God who carried you through your breaking is the same God who walks with you into your becoming. Peace becomes your posture, faith becomes your lens, trust becomes your breathing, and prayer becomes less of a rescue cry and more of a daily returning, a returning to the truth that you are held, a returning to the truth that you are guided, a returning to the truth that you are loved, even in your trembling. You begin to see your life differently. The storms that once defined you no longer shake your foundation. The wounds that once controlled you no longer dictate your worth. The uncertainties that once scared you no longer steal your sleep, not because they disappeared, but because the presence within you became stronger than the pressures around you. You learn to face each day with a simple, steady prayer, one that has been shaped by every tear, every silence, every surrender along the way. Lord, let your peace lead me. Let it guard my heart. Let it guide my steps. Let it quiet my fear. And this prayer is not whispered in desperation anymore. It is spoken with confidence, with gratitude, with the assurance of someone who has seen God work in hidden spaces. You look back on the moments that broke you, and instead of bitterness, you feel gratitude. Not for the pain, but for the transformation it made possible. You recognize that the collapse was not your ending, it was your awakening. You recognize that God's silence was not neglect, it was preparation. You recognize that surrender was not defeat, it was the doorway to a peace the world could never offer. And now, as you step into the next chapters of your life, you carry something far more valuable than certainty. You carry peace that no circumstance can take from you. Peace that rises above fear. Peace that anchors you when life shifts suddenly. Peace that reminds you that even when you don't know the way, you know the one who leads it. And perhaps the greatest miracle of all is this: you no longer live waiting for storms to pass. You live knowing you are held through them. This becomes your testimony, your strength, your song, your way of moving through the world, and your prayer remains simple, steady, and true. Lord, make your peace my home, not only today, but every day that follows. You start to notice small miracles woven into ordinary days, the right person arriving at the right moment, clarity forming where confusion once lived, resilience rising when exhaustion tried to return. You begin to understand that peace is not passive, it is powerful. Peace does not mean accepting defeat, it means walking forward with divine confidence. Peace is not the absence of storms, it is the presence of God within them. And so your life becomes a testimony not of perfection, but of perseverance, not of certainty, but of trust, not of your own wisdom, but of God's faithfulness. People around you begin to notice. They may not understand what changed, but they sense the shift. They see a calmness that does not match your circumstances. They see a strength that doesn't come from human effort. They see a quiet courage that can only come from someone who has been touched by grace. You realize in these moments that your journey was never just about you. Your obedience becomes light for others. Your peace becomes a refuge for someone else's storm. Your story becomes evidence that God still transforms, still guides, still walks with his people. And as you continue forward, one simple truth anchors everything. You don't need to know the whole path. You only need to follow the one who leads it. Faith becomes less about what you see and more about who you trust. Peace becomes less about the world around you and more about the world within you. And step by step, guided by that holy stillness, you walk into the life God had been preparing for you all along, one obedient moment at a time.